Hello
Hello.
there. How are y'all doing today? Welcome to Restoration Fellowship and the Counting of the Omer. This is day
Yes.
45.
Yes.
Day 45 of the Counting of the Omer. So just a few days left until Pentecost and such.
Yeah.
So just some exciting times. I hope that y'all have been having a good Memorial Day.
Yes. Happy
just-
Memorial Day.
Just a recognition of where we are as a nation, what it costs for us to have the freedoms that we do.
Yes.
And for a lot of those that have sacrificed their lives, a lot of those families are still behind, that are still feeling the effects of it. And we've had that for generations. But so what's that statement? That freedom is never really free.
No, it's not.
It always costs something. And that is especially true, for those of us in Messiah. We know that our freedom came at a cost.
Yes.
It came at a great cost. It came at the cost of Messiah himself and his life. He died in our place. So we were just wanting to recognize that, the Memorial Day, all of those families that are participating in that. And I hope you've just had a good day. So do you want to say the blessing to the Omer?
I do. Today is day 3 of week 7 of the counting of the Omer. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam asher kitshanu b'mitzvoto v'tzivanu al shefrat ha'omer. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us by his commandments and commanded us about the counting of the Omer. Amen.
Okay. Very good. So while I do my clicking,
Okay.
you tell them what we're talking about.
Okay. Well, tonight we thought we would talk a little bit more, kind of along more of a Memorial Day type of theme. Kelly on Shabbat talked about God raising an army
Mm-hmm.
and how God had them take a census to count all the men who would be of age for the army. He went a little bit into Joshua chapter 5 and 6, but we're going to be back there again today because in this idea of Memorial Day and the things that our freedom costs and headed towards Shavuot, there is preparation that is there for Shavuot, and yet there is this great victory that takes place behind the commander of the army of the Lord, and the commander of hosts, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes before them, and he leads the way, and he brings the people to victory.
Yes, he does.
And of course, we know that their victory ultimately did not, well, it wasn't cost-free
That's very true.
for the entire land. In other words, they might not have lost anyone in the Battle of Jericho, but they did end up losing some people. The very next battle, actually, the Battle of Ai, they lost some people because of sin.
Mm-hmm.
They thought they had been prepared for that battle and for that onslaught, only to find out that not everybody was. And so we have a responsibility in preparing for Shavuot, and part of that responsibility is also making sure we're ready for the battle.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today.
Yep. Are you in the Lord's army? We used to sing that song.
Yes.
I'm in the Lord's army. I can't even think of how the tune goes all of a sudden.
I'm in the Lord's army.
There you go.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So we
Boy,
sing
that's an
that.
old one.
We sing that and we understand that.
Yes.
But do we really know what it means? Do we really know what it means to be a soldier? I mean, I know I never have served in the military, so not even I know by personal experience. But we have to realize that that being a soldier takes training, it takes a dedication, it takes learning how to use the weapons that you have, learning who your enemy is, learning how to defend yourself from your enemy.
Yes.
And you have to it may cost your life, even for a cause greater than what you may understand. Because usually our greatest cause is a selfish one, is like, what do I have to do to live?
Right.
What do I have to do to gain the greatest pleasure in life, or whatever else?
And yet, how many men have sacrificed their lives before having a wife, before having children, and their life just comes to an abrupt end?
hmm
But we have to make sure we live in such a way that that cost was not for nothing.
That's right. That's right. And it's the generations that follow that have that responsibility.
Yes.
But again, before you go into battle, it takes preparation.
Yes.
Thankfully, they don't just they don't recruit you in the office and throw you. Most places shouldn't anyway.
Right.
Recruit you in an office somewhere and throw you on the front lines the next moment and say, "Here, go win this battle for us." I mean, they typically go through a period of training and preparation, and that's what even the Israelites did.
Yes.
They were coming out of the 40 years of wandering in the desert when they missed their window of opportunity the first time, and the 12 spies and such, and 10 of them came back with the evil report. So now it's 40 years later. That entire generation had to die before they could go on and move forward. And that can be a scary thought in its own right. But Joshua didn't just, it's like, okay, it's been 40 years, everybody's gone, let's go, and just run over there and just start waylaying on everybody.
Right.
There was a period of preparation before they left, a period of sanctification, because this is Memorial Day, and one of the things that they did was celebrate a memorial
Yes.
before moving into the land. And that's in Joshua
Chapter 5.
chapter 5.
Okay. So if you got your Bibles, turn to Joshua chapter 5. Now, what the first thing we see is that they are going to do, they're going to have some circumcision done. Okay. Because while they were in the wilderness, the babies were not circumcised in the wilderness, the baby boys.
For whatever reason, they didn't do it.
Right. So they go through a circumcision the very first thing. Okay. I'm going to start in verse 2. At that time, Adonai, the Lord, said to Joshua, make yourselves flint knives and circumcise again Bnei Israel, or the children of Israel, a second time. So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the children of Israel at Gibeah ha-Araloth. Now this is the reason why Joshua circumcised all the people that came out of Egypt, who were males, all the men of war who had died in the wilderness along the way after they came out of Egypt. Though all the people that came out were circumcised, none of the people who were born in the wilderness along the way as they came out of Egypt had been circumcised. Okay,
which was a sign of being a part of the covenant,
right,
and such as that. And there's various explanations for why they didn't do it. Some of it was the traveling. Some of it was that they didn't want to have anything slowed down or whatever else. But there's the ultimate thing is they didn't do it for whatever reason.
Right. Okay. So then they were in the wilderness for 40 years, right? I'm trying to look here.
Until that generation died off.
Yes.
He raised up their children in verse 7 in their place.
Yes, that's where I was going. Go ahead.
Joshua circumcised them, for they were uncircumcised since they had not been circumcised along the way. Now it came to pass, after they had finished circumcising the entire nation, they remained in their places in the camp until they recovered.
There was some recovery that took place. And actually, from what we understand, full recovery took about 6 days. I'm sorry, 3 days. 3 days, not 6 days. About 3 days, roughly. But their preparation for the battle did not end with the circumcision.
Mm-mm.
And the Lord had been faithful to them because he caused fear to permeate the people of Jericho and the surrounding communities.
Well, they had already had a miraculous crossing of the Jordan River back in the end of chapter 4. The beginning of chapter 5 starts out with them saying that they heard about all of that stuff. And, of course, so God was going before them to spread the word that, hey, these guys are coming.
And nobody was coming out of Jericho and nobody was going in. They had locked themselves in. So, you would think that if you're a military person, it would have been smart to attack the Israelites right after the circumcision, right? No, not if you're scared and locked up inside. You don't even know what's going on in your enemy's camp, which for the people of Jericho, which would have been Israel, of course. But they were locked up inside. So God protected the Israelites as they were going through this experience.
Mm-hmm.
Then what happened?
Well, verse 9 says, Then Adonai said to Joshua, This day I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. Therefore the name of the place has been called Gilgal to this day. And while Bnei Israel camped at Gilgal, they observed Passover on the evening of the 14th day of the month in the plains of Jericho. On the day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate the produce of the land and the matzot and the roasted grain. Then the manna ceased on that day after they had eaten of the produce of the land. Bnei Israel had manna no longer, but ate some of the yield of the land of Canaan that year. Okay, so they had a memorial.
They sure did.
So they have gone for 40 years. So they're going into, as one of the other passages, I think it's in Kings, where it says, in the spring when kings go off to war.
That's in Samuel.
Is it Samuel? Okay. So they're going there in springtime. They're coming there right at the beginning of the year. And so on the 14th day, while they were camped, while they had done all of this before, while they were recovering from that, they then celebrated the Passover, the memorial, reminding them of what it took for them to get where they are.
Yes.
Which is, again, that's a lot of what Memorial Day is supposed to be about.
Yes.
A recognition of what it took for us to be where we are.
Because they were remembering how God brought them out of Egypt, right? And everything that battle took to just bring them out of Egypt. Remember, Joshua and Caleb are the only ones who left Egypt of fighting age that are now going in.
So 20, they were the only ones over 20 when the 40 years before that have survived.
Right. And so we know later from the end of Joshua, when Caleb says, "Give me Hebron," right? Caleb's 85 by that point. Like, I can imagine going into battle at 85, none less taking a place like Hebron, which was in the mountains.
Well, he says, "Give me the hill country."
Give me the hill country, the hard country. Okay, so we see them having this memorial of Passover, remembering what God has already done for them. And that was so much of it. It's amazing to me. I'm thinking specifically right now of Acts chapter 4 and the prayer of the believers in Acts chapter 4. And the very first thing that they do is they remind God what he has done for them. And so much of the prayers in Scripture, a lot of times, are just that. They're a recitation of the things that God has actually done for his people. And it's beautiful. Before you ask God for anything, remind him what he has done for you. And that to me, it just speaks volumes. So while they're preparing for this battle, they remind themselves and they remind God how much God has done for them to bring them this far. So it's at that point.
Well, even with that, I mean, we still have to be reminded of that too. We are 2,000 years removed from the crucifixion, 2,000 years removed from the resurrection in the early church, but we can't think that God has only been working all that long ago, that he's not working now.
Oh yeah. We
have to be reminded about how much he is still doing. It may not be as obvious in some ways. We may not see it like it was happening here, but maybe that's a statement about us.
And God's been working all along.
And he has been working all along, and he is working in pockets and places that the miraculous kind of things do happen on a regular basis. the demonic confrontation does happen on a regular basis. It is more confrontational, or it is more out in the open. And honestly, I think we're starting to see a more out in the open conflict all the more, and that will probably increase in the days ahead as the coming of Messiah draws nearer. And so we need to be reminded of the victory that he has for us. And so we need to always remind ourselves what God has done in our lives, and what that we trust him in that,
Yes.
and that we can trust him for our future and the future battles that we're going to face. So I felt the need to say that.
I think that's very important. But yeah, okay, so the next thing that happens is Joshua goes up to the city. He's surveying the battlefield, basically, and he meets somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Who does he meet?
There was a man standing in front of him with his sword drawn in his hand. So, I mean, he's already prepared for battle. Joshua approached him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" "Neither," he said. "Rather, I have now come as commander of Adonai's army." Then Joshua fell on his face to the ground and worshipped. Then he asked him, "What is my Lord saying to his servant?" Then the commander of Adonai's army replied to Joshua, "Take your sandal off your foot, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so.
Okay, so Joshua worshiped this person.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not an angel.
It can't be an angel.
You covered that on Shabbat.
Mm-hmm.
You did that a really good job of that. So this is not an angel. So who is this?
Well, this is best understood to be a manifestation, an appearance of Yeshua,
Right.
Yeshua the Messiah. Because if he was only an angel, and an angel would have stopped him and corrected him when Joshua bowed down to the ground in worship, even if, just so there was no confusion, just so there was no sense of, okay, I would hate for him to worship me. Anytime that happens, like we see in the book of Revelation.
Yes.
When John falls to the feet at the ground of an angel, the angel says, "Get up. I am only a servant like you." Right. So no confusion about the matter. And then the other reason for that is, he says, "Take off your sandal, for the place where you are standing is holy." Yes. The only other time that really happens is the conversation with Moses and the Lord at the burning bush. And the reason why that place was holy is because of the Lord's presence. God's presence was there.
And actually, what's really interesting, there are instances all throughout Scripture. We just don't realize it because we don't understand the Jewish culture. We don't understand the temple service is on the Temple Mount, within the temple proper. The priests are barefoot. Mm-hmm. They are barefoot. They are in the presence of the Lord. They have removed their sandals, for the place they are standing is holy ground. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, on that Temple Mount, they were barefoot.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, he meets the commander of the Lord's army, and
yes.
this harkens over to what Yeshua himself has to say, at his arrest. And Peter strikes off the high priest, his servant's ear, and he's like, "Look, you need to put that away, because don't you know that if I wanted to call on 12 legions of angels, 10 legions, 12, thank you, 12 legions of angels, I could do so, and it'd be here.
They'd be at my disposal."
Yeah, he is the commander of the army of the Lord,
right? And
he's also at the front lines of the battle.
Okay, so Joshua receives some instructions. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's read about those instructions in chapter 6.
Jericho was tightly shut up because of Bnei Yisrael, no one going out and no one coming in. Then Adonai said to Joshua, "Look, I've given Jericho into your hands with its king and his mighty warriors. Now you are to march around the city, all the men of war circling the city once. So you are to do for 6 days. 7 priests will carry 7 shofars of ram's horns before the ark. Then on the 7th day you are to circle the city 7 times while the priests blow the shofars. It will be when they make a long blast on the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the shofar, have all the people shout a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people will go up, every one straight ahead." Okay,
so for 6 days, they march around how many times?
Just the one time.
Just the one time. And at the end of that, they blow the shofar.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the 7th day, they march around how many times?
7 times.
So how many times is that total?
How many times is that total? Let's see. 7 plus 6 is 13.
13.
Okay.
There's a reason the enemy doesn't like that number. Just saying. Okay.
She's making me use math skills. I ain't done that in a long time.
So we've got they've marched around 6 times for 6, one time for 6 days, and then on the 7th day 7 times.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the 7th day, what do?
Well, that's when the long blast of the shofar, all the people shout.
And what happens to those walls?
They fall.
They fall flat.
From pretty much is considered from the inside out.
Right.
Normally, if somebody were trying to attack it, they'd be trying to punch it in. But these are ones that fall down and collapse upon themselves with not
so they can go right in.
Yeah.
And actually, they're probably not flat, but flat in the sense that they could go in.
Oh, yeah.
Over them, okay? Climb in, right? Because there would have been a lot of bricks that had come down and stuff like that. A lot of probably plaster and debris and stuff, right? So,
and there's some good what is it
yes.
that is it the end of the Patterns of Evidence
Patterns
movie?
of Evidence, yes.
If you have never seen that,
excellent
the original
it's
Patterns
really
of Evidence movie is very good, but it also goes in at the end of it to the Battle of Jericho and what the city wall designs were and some of the evidence that they found and such as that. So that's a fascinating look.
And all of the wall fell except for
one section.
Who lived in that section?
Well, that would have been Rahab.
And she helped the spies, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what was she putting outside of her window?
A red or a red sash of some kind.
A scarlet cord, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, that symbolized almost the blood that the Israelites put on their doors, right, at the original Passover.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it was Passover time. They had just got done celebrating Passover. So she was saved at that point,
mm-hmm.
right? And her part of the wall did not fall, did not collapse. So they're able to go right in. It's at that point they're expected to fight.
Mm-hmm.
When you fight a battle, you're going to come across resistance. You may win that battle. You may have complete and total victory in that battle, but there's going to be some resistance,
mm-hmm.
right?
Nobody likes to lose.
Nobody likes to lose, and it doesn't say that God caused chaos and for all the people of Jericho to run away. It doesn't say that,
Mm-mm.
right? So they went in. Now, here's the thing that kind of got me the other day when I was looking at Joshua a little bit closer. It's the idea of the walls falling, okay? Well, let me back up for a minute. The 7 times they march around on the 7th day,
mm-hmm.
right? March around 7 times and then blow the shofar and shout real loud.
Well, what's weird about that is it says that they had been told not to let a word out of their mouth every time that they had been marching around. So
right.
They were silent every time. And that's not like, the military and how they would typically do things. They would typically be making noise, trying to intimidate, but it was their silence that was intimidating for most of the experience. But then when they did raise their voice,
it was loud.
Whew.
But yeah, the idea of that shofar blast and that shouting, of course, that's imagery of
Feast of Trumpets.
The Feast of Trumpets. But they're doing this, and when you look in the book of Revelation, you see 7 seals. You see 7 trumpets,
mm-hmm.
right? Those 7 shofar blasts, right? And I thought that was kind of interesting because they're going into the land to take the land. In other words, they are going in to establish the kingdom,
mm-hmm.
or should I say the glimpse of the kingdom. Obviously, the ultimate
shadow.
Kingdom is under Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
But they're going in to establish the kingdom in that sense. And there's this idea of the seven trumpets. So I just think that's interesting.
That's imagery that
attention.
when Jewish people hear about 7 trumpets, they'll think back to the Battle of Jericho.
And so then you have the idea of the walls falling flat. Okay, what does Scripture tell us is going to happen? Not so much to walls, but to mountains.
Mm.
The mountains are going to
fall.
and the mountains represent kingdoms, right? His mountain will rise up, everybody else's will fall. He will be exalted, all the other nations will come down. Okay? And what Jericho thought made them impenetrable and strong, that wall.
They trusted in that wall.
Comes down.
Keep walking, because you won't knock down that wall.
Right.
For Angie, you VeggieTales fans out there.
Right. Yeah, that wall came down. What they were trusting in came down. That kingdom came down.
And that is imagery of the second coming and of the Feast of
the establishment of the kingdom.
And the Feast of Trumpets. That when that trumpet is blown and the Lord returns, it's not going to be a real even-handed or back and forth combat. It's not going to be in question who the victor is going to be.
Not at all.
And so all those nations, all those armies are going to fall in the instant. Because the Lord has already won the battle. His robe is dipped in blood, as it talks about in Revelation. That's before the battle really starts.
And this is the first battle for the land, right?
Yes.
The last battle for the land is what?
The last battle? Are you talking about here in this generation? Or
No.
Okay,
ultimately, the last battle for the land is
Armageddon.
Armageddon. So God started it. And he's going to end it.
All of the world's armies are going to amass there at the Valley of Armageddon, which is quite large.
Very large. So God starts the process of taking the land. Why? Whose land is it?
It's his.
It's his.
The land is mine, he says.
It's his. It's not the Jews. It doesn't belong to them. God has deeded it to them.
They are the tenants.
It is God's land.
Yeshua told several parables about the master or the owner of the land deeding or renting out the land to tenants, and he sends the prophets. He sends his servants there to check up on them, to collect some of the fruit from time to time, and he compares them. The tenants are the ones that beat and stone and kill
he sends his
the
son,
prophet. Ultimately, he sends his son. They kill his son.
But yes, God, the land belongs to God, and he decides who it belongs to. And he has decided that land belongs to the Jewish people. That's his decision. And there is nothing anybody can do to change that fact. Right? The world may resist that. The world may fight against that. But God has declared it so. Matter of fact, in the book of Joel, I believe it's in Joel chapter 3, one of the reasons it gives for the Messiah returning, for the Messiah coming and fighting, was because his land has been divided. So when we hear news of the land of Israel and people wanting to divide that land, that is not a good thing.
That's a dangerous prospect, because ultimately
that makes God angry.
That's not recognizing the Lord's authority on that issue. You're not really recognizing his claim.
Yes.
You're not really. You're trying to divide up and sell essentially land that you don't even own.
Right. And ultimately, within the kingdom, of course, the rule of Israel, because it's the rule of Messiah, is going to cover the whole earth. Okay?
The whole earth is his.
The whole earth is his. That's right.
And he sets up where peoples are to live and the nations and all of that. That's Acts 17.
Yes.
He determines where all those people live.
And so on this Memorial Day, for those of us who live in the United States, on this Memorial Day, let us remember not just our country's soldiers who have given their lives for our freedom here in this country, but let's also remember those who have given their life for God's kingdom. And ultimately, the one who's given the most is God himself in the life of his son.
Mm-hmm.
That is very essential for us to remember.
Yes, it is.
So we just wanted to come kind of give a encouragement in that for today, and a little message on that for today, and say Happy Memorial
and
Day.
just for the reminder, Paul talks about having the armor of God. We should understand that we are considered soldiers on the front line of the spiritual battle.
And yet that armor is the garments of who?
Not a soldier in that sense, but
Not a
primarily
Roman
that
soldier,
of a
but
priest.
A priest. Yes.
The high priest in particular, and there's a lot of ways of what it reminds a lot of people of. But
who was in front of Joshua's men?
The
Who
priests,
went first?
the Levites.
The priest went first, carrying the ark, right? So God went before them. Yes.
Yeah. So it's that armor in Ephesians chapter 6. You should really do a good study on how that parallels the priestly outfits, because it's not the first time the armor of God has been mentioned. Isaiah talks about it
long before there were Roman soldiers.
Yes, and all those little pictures that we have on the wall or from Sunday school or vacation Bible school of the Roman soldiers, like no, the Jewish people had an understanding of the armor of God long before they ever showed up.
Rome was the enemy.
Yeah,
Rome was the enemy.
They would not depict God's armor with that of the enemy.
No.
But then there's 2 Timothy 2. This is some of the ones that we also talked about. Be strengthened in the grace that is in Messiah Yeshua, and what you have heard from me among many witnesses, entrust to faithful people who will be capable to teach others also. Suffer hardship with me as a good soldier of Messiah Yeshua.
There you go.
No one serving as a soldier entangles himself in the activities of everyday life so that he might please the one who enlisted him, or who is his commander. So who is our commander? The commander
is Yeshua.
The commander of the armies of the Lord. And so we seek to please him. And so there are so many things that can distract us, so many things that can get in the way of our serving as a soldier. I mean, can you imagine how effective a military would be is if, when the order comes down, okay, we're shipping off, everybody comes back and says, but wait a minute, the Cowboy game is on. We can't go right now. The national championship is just a couple of days away, and so we can't leave until that one's over.
Doesn't matter. And for those of you who have served in the military, you know that when your commanding officer says, "Let's go," you go. You might have 5 minutes, maybe, but when he says go, you go.
Mm-hmm. So we need to understand that our commanding officer, when he gives the word, we're going to go, and when he sends his angels to gather his people from the four corners of the earth, he's not going to necessarily.
We're going to battle. Text
message you and say, okay, you got 5 minutes. Is this a good time? Because we'd really like to take you with us right now. But, if you're busy, we understand. Well, we don't really want to pull that off.
No, we don't.
But
when he gathers us, we're going to battle.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to come behind him in battle.
Mm-hmm. So may the Lord bless y'all. I know this is a short one tonight because I know this is that holiday weekend kind of a thing, but
enjoy the rest of your day.
May the Lord bless y'all.
Enjoyed ours so far,
and may He continue to provide our freedom that we have in this country, but may we also see the freedom that He provides in His Word. The Torah, we can walk around in liberty because we keep His precepts. And then as James talks about, that we look intently into the perfect law that gives freedom.
Yes.
Understand that our freedom truly is from Him, and His Torah, His law, is actually going to make us more free when we live by it. So with that, y'all have a good night. We'll see you back tomorrow night, and with the continuing of the counting of the Omer.
Happy Memorial Day.
Yeah. Shalom, everybody.
Not Shabbat Shalom, but Shalom.